What I'm going to be talking about today is ethnobotany. This is the study, as you can see, of plants and how people use them. So there are lots of ways that we use plants. The most obvious way is to eat them. And that's what we mostly think of is, consuming them for things like fruits and vegetables and so forth, and grains. However, there are lots of ways that humans use plants. And so the most common things that you might think of outside of eating them is for materials. So using them to make things like fabrics and other construction type things. So things like hats, using things like bamboo and reeds to make instruments or to make things like baskets. We also, as we're going to see in here, use them to make medications and other sorts of materials. So what I'm going to focus on for a majority of this is one specific crop, which is mainly a food crop. And it's one that most of you are probably familiar with. It's one that most people like a lot. So when you think of chocolate, picture what chocolate is in your mind. And my guess is it's going to be something like this. So we're thinking about like chocolate candy, chocolate cake, cocoa, something like that. However, this is the finished product. So this has a lot of other materials in it. It is not actually where chocolate comes from. And so that's what I want to show you a little bit about, to show you where these kinds of things come from. So this is where chocolate comes from. This is cacao. And so I'm going to show you the process of getting just chocolate. So how we get cacao. So the cacao tree is native to the Amazon rainforest in South America. Not exactly sure where it came from specifically, but we know it came from this region. And then it got transported out from there. It was transported north into Central America and then into Mexico. And then it was shipped from here over into Spain. When the cacao was processed in this region from South America to Central America with Mexico, they actually would just put it in hot water and maybe add some spices like chili and so forth. And that's how they would drink hot chocolate. It wasn't until it was exported into Europe that we started adding sugar to it and get the hot chocolate that we are used to today. So how do you get a cacao tree? Well, you've got to start with a seed. So this is the cacao pod that, was in that first picture. It's been cut open, and so this is packed full of seeds. So here are the individual seeds. This person has 3 seeds in their hands, and you might look at that and go, it doesn't look much like a seed. It's covered in pulp, so it's pulpy material. We'll see why that's important here. And that is, in order to get the seeds planted in the wild, the pulp is actually the way that you get animals to move the seeds around. So it attracts these animals. So in the wild, squirrels will dig open these pods and get the seeds. They'll eat the pulp and then they will drop the seeds because they're bitter. And so they'll pick those up and carry them around. Same thing with monkeys, birds. All of these guys will pick these seeds up. They'll eat that fleshy pulp and then drop the seeds in a new area. If we're cultivating them, we'll take the whole thing, pulp and all, and put it in the ground. And then a while later, you get a tree seedling. So you can see here, there's where the seed was. And we've got a little tiny tree, the roots down here. So how do you make the tree happy? Well, you're going to give it what you give most plants, right? We're going to make sure it gets lots of water. You need to make sure it gets sun. But here's the thing with cacao trees. They actually are a rainforest tree. They're what we call an understory tree. So they need shade. And so that's why you see this picture here. So a lot of places where cacao is grown, they're going to be grown underneath other trees like banana trees. And other taller trees, so they'll get shaded so that they won't get too much sun. They're also going to only be grown in warmer areas. They need temperatures between 70 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit year round, and they need rain year round. So these are still a tropical type tree. You can't grow cacao in Ohio unless you have a greenhouse. And even then it doesn't do very well. So they're also going to need nutrients. So most of the time they're going to be able to get these nutrients from things like leaves breaking down. So you can see little insects and fungi in here. These guys are going to break down the leaves and other material that's on the floor of the forest to be able to release the nitrogen and phosphorus for the plants so that they get those nutrients that they need. The other thing we need to get cacao are pollinators. So what you're seeing in this picture here, these are the flowers of the cacao tree. And the pollinators, you might look at that and go, well, that looks like a mosquito. Well, they're closely related. These are midges. They do look an awful lot like mosquitoes, and mosquitoes actually are pollinators as well. But we need these little midges to come in and pollinate the flowers just like a bee would. And so they're just the right size and shape. They'll come in, pollinate these cacao flowers, and then you get the fruit. So this is a tiny little cacao pod. And so that is going to get started. It's going to start to grow. And so they're going to grow and ripen. So you can see here, this is a little different than what we're used to as far as fruit trees go. If you've ever seen an apple or a pear tree, pretty much all the fruit comes on at the same time and ripens around the same time. Cacao is a little different. So if you look in this picture, you'll see there are different size pods and different colored pods. This is because the trees can actually flower and get fruit, get cacao pods on all at the same time, and can have pods at different ripening stages all at the same time. So these guys can ripen all different stages, so they have a very long production time. So there is a ripe cacao pod. The pods can be different colors, and it can take up to 8 months for a pod to grow to its full size. Then they're going to harvest it. Cacao has to be harvested by hand because of the varying different ripening stages of the pods on the tree. So they'll have to go out and harvest those by hand. And now we've got our seeds that we started with. Now we could plant these again and get more trees, but since we want chocolate, we're going to actually need to harvest these out. So they're going to dig out the seeds and place them in a bag or a bucket, and then those seeds are going to get transferred into a fermentation bin. So this fermentation bin, you can see these start to look a little different. They are now kind of looking gooey. They're going to be placed in here for a couple of days. And the goal here is to get that white pulp to break down and come off of the beans. So that's why they're starting to look a little bit more like a bean rather than that white gooey stuff. Once they have fermented and that pulp has come off, they're going to be put out onto drying racks. And so they'll be put out here so they can sun dry, get as much of that water out as possible. And then they'll be roasted. This is what gives them that nice chocolatey flavor that we're used to. And it also gets the remaining water out of the beans. Then they're going to shell them, and what we're looking at here is a small operation. This is a home operation type of business rather than a major corporation, because some places the shelling will actually be done by a machine. I actually got to see down in the Dominican Republic a farm that does this same process, and they do it with not just cacao but also with coffee. The processes are actually very similar between cacao and coffee, and once they're done shelling, then they'll grind it. So you can see they have a machine. This one is powered. This one is either gas powered or foot powered. It's kind of hard to see from the picture, but they're going to grind it, and this is the ground cacao that will then be mixed up, warmed up, and create this chocolate liquor, which they're going to mix as it cools down. They will then knead it. So they have to mix and knead it because cacao has a lot of oil in it. And so they're going to knead it up, mix it up, and then they're going to mold it. So this is where they're going to be making the bars. So you can see the molds here, and they're pushing the mixed cacao, the mixed chocolate into these molds so that they now have bars of chocolate. Now these might look a little odd to you. They don't really look like chocolate, and they aren't actually chocolate bars yet. They are a version of chocolate right now, but this would taste like baker's chocolate. If you've ever tasted baker's chocolate, the cooking chocolate, that's what this would taste like. It doesn't have anything in it except for the cacao. So this is, 100% cacao. It's not going to taste like what you think of as chocolate. It's still going to be pretty bitter compared to what we're used to, because if you think about it, we add things like milk and sugar and so forth to it. So that is how all of the stuff that has to happen until we can actually then take it and turn it into the chocolates that we're used to seeing. The other thing that can be done to that in chocolate is we can actually squeeze it, and that will get us the powder. So if you've ever had cocoa powder, that has had the cocoa butter removed out of it, the oil. That cocoa butter is extracted to do a couple things. One, we can use it to make other confections. That's actually how white chocolate is made. So white chocolate is a chocolate. It's just made just using the cocoa butter, none of the other solids from the cacao. We also use cocoa butter in the manufacture of things like some tobacco products, soaps, and cosmetics. So those are actually going to be used from the cacao plant as well. A couple other ones I just want to look at. So coffee, like I said, coffee is produced in a very similar way. So you can see the beans up here. The little difference between coffee and cacao is the pods. So these are coffee beans. They are going to be 1 to 2 beans per fruit. So instead of a big pod, they're little tiny guys, but same thing, they're going to be harvested by hand. So they can't harvest them using machinery. So this one's been produced for quite a while, just like cacao. And most of you are familiar with its main use as a stimulant, boiling it and soaking it to get coffee. This will increase heart output, so we actually have been extracting caffeine from this in order to use it as different types of medicines. But we also know it does other things. It does things like stimulate digestion. It's also a powerful diuretic, meaning that it actually removes water from your system. So it can, in some instances, help lower some blood pressure. And it does help for some people relieve headaches because it alters your blood flow. So coffee is definitely a crop that is in this ethnobotany section where we've been looking at how people have been using it over time. Another one that you may have come across is aloe. I don't know if any of you had this in your house growing up, but I know I did. There's lots of uses for aloe. Historically, it was used as a beauty treatment by Cleopatra, just as a little history part. This is why we had it in our house. We had it to relieve burns on skin. So if you break it, like you see in the picture over here, the plant produces this kind of jelly goo. And so this can help as far as if you have a skin burn, you can put this on there and it will soothe it. This is why you often can buy aloe vera gel for sunburns. It can also help soothe skin rashes. Most people don't realize that you can also use that aloe vera gel for a lot of skin rashes as well. And it's been shown to help relieve stomach ulcers. Not all of them, but it can help with some because it's doing the same thing in your stomach as it's doing on your skin. So that wraps up my intro for ethnobotany.